The cuffs snapped around my wrists, the cold steel biting into my skin as the red and blue lights of the police cruiser pulsed like a heartbeat in the night. I stood at the edge of a rest stop off I-40, just 8 miles outside Memphis, Tennessee, my breath visible in the chilly midnight air. I'm Evelyn Harper, a 46-year-old black woman, a federal judge from Atlanta, and in that moment, I was nothing but a suspect to the 2 officers glaring at me. My heart pounded not from fear, but from a rage so deep it felt like it could crack the earth. "You're under arrest for loitering," growled Officer Robert Vance, a 50-year-old white man, his 6'2" frame looming over me, his eyes glinting, with a prejudice I'd faced since my childhood in Birmingham's toughest neighborhoods. His partner, Officer Caleb Reed, 29, wiry and restless, smirked as he tightened the cuffs, his 5'10" presence radiating eager complicity. I'd stopped to stretch after a 400-mile drive, my sedan parked alone under the rest stop's flickering lights, but to them, my dark skin was reason enough to assume guilt. As they shoved me into the cruiser, the weight of their assumptions pressed harder than the metal on my wrists, and I knew this night would ignite a fire that Memphis and maybe the nation wouldn't soon forget. I sat in the back of the cruiser, the vinyl seat sticking to my legs, the air thick with the scent of stale coffee and arrogance. Vance drove, his meaty hands gripping the wheel, his silence louder than any accusation. Reed glanced back, his hazel eyes flickering with something doubt, maybe, or just the thrill of power. "What's a woman like you doing out here alone?" he asked, his tone probing, as if my existence needed justification. I kept my gaze steady, my 5'7" frame rigid with defiance. "Driving home," I said, my voice calm but edged with steel. "Last I checked, that's not a crime." Vance snorted, his disdain a familiar echo of the slurs I'd heard as a kid, walking past jeering crowds to integrate my high school. I thought of my mother then, her voice fierce in my memory. "Evelyn, they'll try to break you, but you're stronger than their hate." That strength kept me upright as we sped toward the precinct, 4 miles away. The city's lights blurring past like a promise of justice. I'd have to claim myself at the precinct. They locked me in a 5-by-7-foot cell, the concrete walls gray and unyielding, the fluorescent buzz overhead mocking my situation. The charges loitering and resisting arrest were a flimsy excuse, scribbled on a report that reeked of bias. I sat on the narrow bench, my hands still tingling from the cuffs, and pulled out the small notebook I always carry. Writing is my refuge, a habit from my law school days at Howard, where I'd jot down dreams of justice between grueling study sessions. I scribbled now, my pen racing. They saw my skin, not my robe, but they'll see it soon. My thoughts churned anger at Vance's smug certainty, frustration at Reed's blind loyalty, and a burning resolve to turn this humiliation into a reckoning. I thought of the kids I mentor in Atlanta, teens like 15-year-old Jamal, who looked to me to prove the system can work for them. This wasn't just about me, it was about every black person who'd felt these invisible chains. Vance's main villain in this moment wasn't just a man, he was a symbol of a system that thrives on unchecked power. I'd learned about him later, through whispers and records. 25 years on the force. A trail of complaints for excessive force, mostly against black and brown folks, buried under bureaucratic shrugs. His broad shoulders and weathered face carried the confidence of someone who'd never faced consequences, his deep voice barking orders like he owned the night. But I saw cracks in his armor, a nervous glance when I mentioned my rights, a slight tremor in his hand when he cuffed me. He wasn't invincible. He was a man clinging to a fading world where his badge meant supremacy. Red, younger and greener, was different. His ambition outstripped his morals, but his hesitation suggested a conscience not yet fully buried. I wondered if he followed Vance out of fear or admiration, and whether that flicker of doubt could grow into something more. By 5 a.m. my colleague, Marcus Tate, a 40-year-old attorney with a fire for justice, got word of my arrest. He stormed the precinct, his 6-foot frame filling the doorway, his voice sharp as he demanded my release. "You've got Judge Evelyn Harper in there," he said, and the desk sergeant's face paled. Vance and Reed, called back to the station, exchanged looks. Vance's jaw tightened, Reed's eyes darted away. By 6 a.m. I was free. The charges dropped like a bad lie, but the sting of that night clung to me. I stepped into the Memphis dawn, the Mississippi River glinting in the distance, and Marcus clapped a hand on my shoulder. "We're not letting this slide, Evelyn," he said. I nodded, my mind already in the courtroom. "They'll face me again," I said, "but on my terms." The city woke to the news, and it spread like a spark on dry grass. By 8 a.m. X was ablaze with 15,000 posts tagged #Justice for Evelyn, mostly from folks 25 to 55, their words raw with outrage and hope. A local activist, Keisha Wells, 34, posted a video from her community center, her voice trembling as she recounted my story to her 20,000 followers. "This is why we fight," she said, and the video hit 100,000 views in hours. Protests formed outside the precinct, 300 strong, a mix of young professionals and older advocates, their signs bold, "No more profiling." I joined them briefly, feeling their energy, their chants a pulse that matched my own. A gas station clerk, Maria 42, approached me, her hands twisting nervously. "I saw it happen," she whispered. I should have spoken up. Her guilt mirrored the city's, a collective weight of silence we'd need to break. Back in my hotel, 3 miles from the precinct, I opened my notebook again. I wrote about the cuffs, the officer's sneers, the clerk's regret. But I also wrote about Keisha's video, the protesters' fire. The kids I mentor who'd see this as proof they can fight back. My phone buzzed. Lisa, my partner, her voice steady from Atlanta. "You're stronger than this, Evelyn," she said. "Show them who you are." Our daughter, Zoe 17, texted, "Mom, make them pay." Their faith anchored me, but so did my own history. I'd faced worse stunts in law school, dismissals in courtrooms where I was the only black woman. Each time, I'd turned pain into power, and this would be no different the next day. I drove 2 miles to the Memphis Federal Courthouse, my black robe, a shield, and a sword. The gallery was packed 300 people, ages 25 to 55. Their faces a mosaic of hope, anger, and expectation. Reporters, maybe 20, scribbled furiously, their cameras clicking like a storm. Vance and Reed stood before me, defendants now, their confidence fraying. Vance's broad frame seemed smaller, his eyes avoiding mine. Reed's hands fidgeted, his face pale. I took the bench, my heart a steady drum. "This court seeks justice," I said, my voice echoing through the 3,000-square-foot room. "And justice demands truth." The prosecution, led by Marcus, played the body cam footage, Vance's slurs, Reed's complicity. Maria testified, her voice shaking but clear. They targeted her for no reason. The crowd's murmurs grew, a tide of anger and resolve. I kept my face calm, but inside I felt their hunger for change, their belief in me. This trial wasn't just about Vance and Reddit, it was about dismantling the system they served, and I was ready to lead the charge. I stood in the quiet of my hotel room, the Memphis skyline, a faint glow beyond the window, the Mississippi River's reflection shimmering like a promise of redemption. It was the morning after my release from that 5-by-7-foot cell, and the weight of the night before clung to me, not just the sting of the cuffs or Officer Vance's sneer, but the fire it had ignited. I'm Evelyn Harper, a 46-year-old federal judge from Atlanta. And in those hours since my wrongful arrest off I-40, I'd become a symbol for a city ready to confront its demons. My phone buzzed relentlessly, texts from my partner Lisa urging me to stay strong. A message from our daughter Zoe saying, "Mom, you're trending." And calls from colleagues like Marcus Tate, who'd already rallied a legal army. I opened my notebook, my pen scratching against the page as I wrote. They tried to break me, but they broke their own shield instead. The words steadied me, grounding the anger and resolve that churned in my chest. I knew what lay ahead, a courtroom, where I'd face officers Robert Vance and Caleb Reed again, not as their prisoner but as their judge. The irony was sharp, but the stakes were sharper. This wasn't just about my humiliation. It was about every black person who'd faced a badge and felt the world tilt against them. By noon, the news had exploded across Memphis. X-posts with hashtag Justice for Evelyn hit 50,000, shared by folks from 25 to 55, their voices a chorus of outrage. And Hope Keisha Wells, the 34-year-old activist whose podcast had gone viral, called me, her voice thick with emotion. "Evelyn, you've lit a spark," she said. "We're organizing a march tonight, 500 strong already." I felt a swell of pride, but also a burden. I wasn't just a judge anymore. I was a beacon for a movement I hadn't chosen but couldn't deny. I drove the 3 miles to Keisha's community center in South Memphis, a modest brick building buzzing with energy. Inside, I met young professionals, parents and retirees, their faces a mix of determination and exhaustion. A 28-year-old teacher, Jamal Carter, approached me, his eyes bright with purpose. "My students are talking about you," he said. "They want to know if justice is real." His words hit me hard, echoing my own mentorship work in Atlanta, where I guide teens like Jamal's students, showing them they can rise above a system stacked against them. Outside, the march was forming. Signs bobbing in the crowd, "No more bias, Black lives demand justice." I joined them briefly, my presence drawing cheers, but I stayed quiet, listening to their chants, feeling their anger mirror mine. Keisha handed me a megaphone, but I shook my head. "This is your moment," I told her. She nodded, her voice booming through the crowd, recounting my arrest with a passion that made my throat tighten. "Evelyn Harper is one of us," she said. "Her fight is our fight." The crowd roared, and I felt their energy surge through me, a reminder that this wasn't just my story, it was theirs too. Back at the hotel, I wrote in my journal, "Their voices are my strength, I'll carry them into the courtroom." I thought of my mother, who'd faced down segregationists in Birmingham, her courage, a legacy I carried in my bones. I couldn't let her down, or Jamal's students, or the 300 people marching under Memphis's streetlights. But the officers Vance and Reed loomed large in my mind. Robert Vance, 50, was the architect of my humiliation, his 6'2" frame, and deep voice wielding authority like a club. I'd learned more about him from Marcus, who'd dug into precinct records, Vance had 25 years on the force, a file thick with complaints mostly from black and Latino drivers dismissed as unsubstantiated. His colleagues called him Iron Rob, a nod to his unyielding demeanor, but I saw the cracks, the nervous tick in his jaw when I'd questioned his grounds for arrest, the way his eyes flickered when Marcus mentioned my title. Vance wasn't just prejudiced. He was a man clinging to a world where his badge meant control, and I threatened that. Caleb Reed, 29, was different, a follower, his wiry build and quick glances betraying a hunger for approval. I sensed he wasn't fully committed to Vance's path, but his silence that night made him complicit. I wondered what drove him: ambition, fear, or something deeper, a conscience buried under years of bad habits. The next morning, I sat in a coffee shop 2 miles from the courthouse meeting Marcus and Keisha to strategize. Marcus, his 6-foot frame leaning over a table littered with legal pads, was all business. "We've got evidence," he said, sliding over a flash drive. "Body cam footage, witness statements, even a gas station clerk who saw it all." I nodded, my mind racing. The clerk, Maria, 42, had called me after the march, her voice trembling with guilt. I should have said something that night, she'd said. Her testimony could be key, but so could the footage. Vance's slurs, Reed's laughter, captured in grainy clarity. Keisha leaned in, her braids swinging as she spoke. "The community's behind you, Evelyn, but they need to see justice, not just hear about it." Her words landed like a challenge, and I accepted it. I thought of my daughter Zoe, who'd texted me a drawing she'd made of judge's gavel smashing chains. "For you, Mom," she'd written. I tucked that image into my heart, a reminder of why I'd fight. By evening, the city was alive with anticipation. Keisha's podcast, Memphis Rising, hit 200,000 downloads, her latest episode featuring interviews with locals who'd faced similar profiling. A 50-year-old mechanic, Leroy, shared how he'd been stopped 5 times in a year, each time for suspicious behavior. His story, raw and unfiltered, mirrored mine, and I felt a kinship that fueled my resolve. I drove to a community art project Keisha had mentioned, a mural taking shape on a wall near the precinct. Young artists ages 25 to 40 painted scenes of justice: a black woman in a robe, scales balanced in her hands, surrounded by faces of every hue. I touched the wet paint, my fingers tracing the outline of the judge, and felt tears prick my eyes. "That's you, a 30-year-old artist," Tasha said softly. "You're giving us hope." I couldn't speak, but I nodded, the weight of their trust settling on my shoulders. Vance, I learned, wasn't untouched by the growing storm. Marcus had heard from a precinct insider that Vance was rattled, his usual swagger dimmed by whispers of an internal review. He'd been seen arguing with superiors, his voice rising as he defended his actions. It was routine, he'd insisted, but the insider said his eyes betrayed panic. Reed, meanwhile, was quieter, avoiding Vance's shadow, his colleagues noting he'd stopped joking around. I wondered if he was starting to see the cost of his silence, if the 300 protesters outside his precinct were breaking through his defenses. I wrote in my journal, "Vance is the storm, Reed the shadow. One must fall, the other might rise." I didn't want revenge. I wanted accountability, a chance to show Memphis that justice could be more than a dream. The day before the trial, I visited my mentorship group virtually, connecting with teens in Atlanta via Zoom. Jamal, 15, asked, "Miss Evelyn, are you scared?" I smiled, though my heart ached. "Not scared, just ready," I said. "This is for you, for all of us." Their faces, bright with hope, reminded me of my own at their age, dreaming of a world where my skin didn't mark me as less. I closed the call and prepared for court, my black robe ironed and waiting. Lisa called, her voice a lifeline. "You're not alone, Evelyn," she said. "We're all with you." I thought of her and Zoe, of the mural, of Keisha's march, of Maria's guilt and Leroy's pain. They were my strength, my reason to face Vance and Reed not as enemies, but as pieces of a system I'd vowed to change. I arrived at the Memphis Federal Courthouse at 8 a.m., the 3,000-square-foot courtroom already buzzing with 300 spectators, their ages spanning 25 to 55, their faces a tapestry of expectation. Reporters, 25 strong, scribbled notes, their cameras trained on me as I took the bench. Vance and Reed stood before me, their cheap suits a stark contrast to their former authority. Vance's broad shoulders slumped slightly, his eyes avoiding mine. Reed's hands twitched, his face pale. I leaned forward, my voice steady. "This court is about truth," I said, the words echoing like a vow. Marcus began, playing the body cam footage. Vance's slurs, Reed's complicity, laid bare. Maria testified, her voice breaking as she described my arrest, her regret a mirror to the city's. The gallery stirred, their murmurs a pulse of anger and hope. I kept my face calm, but inside I felt the weight of their trust, the power of their voices. This trial was my chance to turn pain into progress, to show Memphis and the nation that justice could rise from the ashes of prejudice. The Memphis Federal Courthouse loomed before me, its marble facade glowing under the morning sun, a beacon of justice that felt both familiar and daunting as I stepped inside on the first day of the trial. I'm Evelyn Harper, a 46-year-old black federal judge from Atlanta, and today, I was no longer the woman in cuffs from that rest stop off I-40. I was the arbiter of truth, presiding over Officers Robert Vance and Caleb Reed, the men who tried to strip me of my dignity 8 days ago. The weight of that night still lingered, the bite of steel on my wrists, Vance's sneering accusation, Reed's complicit smirk, but I channeled it into resolve as I donned my black robe, its fabric a shield against the past and a sword for the future. The courtroom, a 3,000-square-foot expanse, buzzed with 350 spectators, their ages spanning 25 to 55, their faces a mosaic of hope, anger, and expectation. Reporters, 30 strong, lined the back, their pens scratching like a chorus of anticipation. I took the bench, my 5'7" frame steady despite the eyes boring into me, and declared, "This court seeks truth, and truth will prevail." My voice echoed, a vow to myself, to Memphis, and to every soul who'd felt the sting of prejudice. Vance and Reed stood before me, their cheap suits a stark contrast to the authority they'd wielded that night. Vance 50, his 6'2" frame, rigid, stared at the floor, his broad shoulders betraying a flicker of Uniza crack in the iron-robbed facade I'd heard about. His 25-year career was a tapestry of complaints, mostly from black and Latino drivers, buried under precinct politics. I saw him now, not just as my accuser, but as a man tethered to a system that rewarded his bias. His deep voice silent, but his eyes darting, hinting at a fear of consequences he'd never faced. Reed, 29, wiry and pale, shifted nervously, his 5'10" frame hunched as if the courtroom's weight pressed on him. His ambition had driven him to follow Vance, but I sensed a fracture in his loyalty, a flicker of shame in his hazel eyes. I wondered what had shaped him: a need for approval, a fear of standing out, or a conscience buried under bad choices. Their presence stirred a storm in me, anger at their actions, hope that this trial could shift their paths, and a fierce determination to expose the system they served. The prosecution, led by Marcus Tate, my 40-year-old colleague whose 6-foot frame commanded the room, began with a precision that cut through the tension. He played the body cam footage, the grainy images projected on a 10-foot screen, Vance's voice spitting slurs as he cuffed me, Reed's laughter a weak echo. The gallery gasped, a collective intake of breath that mirrored my own rage from that night. Marcus called Maria, the 42-year-old gas station clerk who'd witnessed my arrest, to the stand. Her hands trembled as she recounted the scene, her voice breaking. "They targeted her for no reason," she said, her guilt raw. I stood there silent, and I'll regret it forever. Her words hit me like a wave, not just for her courage but for the mirror she held up to a city that had watched too many injustices in silence. I kept my face neutral, but my heart ached for her, for me, for every person who'd felt that helplessness. Next, Marcus called Jamal Carter, the 28-year-old teacher I'd met at Keisha's community center. He testified about his own encounters with Vance's precinct, 3 stops in 2 years, each time for suspicious behavior that amounted to driving while black. "My students asked me if the system's fair," he said, his voice steady, but eyes glistening. "I want to tell them yes, but I need this court to prove it." His words landed like a challenge, not just to me but to the 350 people watching, their murmurs a pulse of shared purpose. I thought of my mentorship kids in Atlanta, their faces like Jamal's students, hungry for a world where justice wasn't a myth. I wrote in my notebook, tucked beneath my robe, "Their hope is my duty. This trial is their answer." The defense, led by a slick attorney named Paul Grayson, 45, tried to deflect. He argued procedural errors and institutional pressures, painting Vance in red as cogs in a broken machine. "These officers acted under stress," he said, his voice smooth but unconvincing. I saw through his tactics, and so did the gallery, their whispers turning sharp. Grayson's eyes darted to Vance, who nodded slightly, his jaw tight. I sensed Vance's desperation, his need to cling to the badge that had shielded him for decades. Reed, though, looked away, his hands clasped tightly, as if wrestling with something deeper. I wondered if he saw himself in Jamal's story, if the weight of his laughter on that body cam was starting to sink in. I wrote, "Vance fights for power, Reed for redemption. Both will face truth." Outside the courthouse, a new movement was blooming, one I hadn't anticipated. Keisha Wells, the 34-year-old activist, had organized a justice wall, a 50-foot stretch of plywood along Beale Street where locals painted messages of hope and resistance. I visited it during a recess 2 miles from the courthouse. The vibrant colors, reds, blues, yellows depicting scales of justice, broken cuffs, and faces of every hue. A 27-year-old artist, Lena, handed me a brush. "Paint something, Judge Harper," she said, her smile warm but urgent. I hesitated, then painted a single word: truth. The crowd, 150 strong, mostly 25 to 40-year-olds, cheered their phones, snapping photos that hit 10,000 likes on X within hours. Lena told me her brother had been profiled by Vance's precinct, and this wall was her fight. "You're giving us a voice," she said. I felt tears prick my eyes, not just for her but for the city's awakening. I was helping to steer. Back in the courtroom, Marcus introduced precinct records, a damning 200 pages showing 20 profiling incidents linked to Vance's unit. The gallery stirred, their anger palpable, but I kept my focus, guiding the proceedings with a calm that belied my inner storm. I thought of my mother who'd marched in Birmingham, her courage a flame I carried. I thought of Lisa and Zoe, their faith, my anchor. Zoe had sent me a new drawing your courtroom with me at the bench, light streaming through. "You're the light, Mom," she'd texted. I held that image as Marcus called a surprise witness, a 55-year-old retired officer, Clara Jones, who'd worked with Vance. Her testimony was a bombshell. Vance bragged about keeping the streets clean. She said, her voice steady, he meant targeting black folks. I stayed quiet too long. The gallery erupted, and I banged my gavel, my heart racing. Clara's courage mirrored Maria's, a chain of voices breaking the silence. Vance's facade cracked further. He shifted, in his seat, his 200-pound frame seeming smaller, his eyes darting to Reed, who looked away. I saw fear in Vance's gaze, not just of conviction but of a world slipping from his grasp. Reed's face was differential, almost haunted, as if Clara's words had struck a nerve. I wondered what drove him to follow Vance, what kept him silent that night. Was it loyalty, or a fear of defying the iron rod myth? I wrote, Reed's silence is his chain. Can he break it? The day ended with the gallery buzzing, their energy a mix of hope and fury. I stepped outside, the Memphis air warm, and saw the Justice Wall glowing under streetlights, now 100 feet long, a testament to a city refusing to stay silent. Keisha met me there, her eyes fierce. "This is bigger than us, Evelyn," she said. "It's a movement." I nodded, feeling the weight of her words, the weight of Memphis, the weight of every kid I'd mentored who dreamed of fairness. As I drove back to my hotel 3 miles away, I thought of Vance and Reed, their lives unraveling. Under the truth, Vance was the villain here, his prejudice a poison that had infected his precinct. But I didn't hate him, I pitied him, a man trapped by his own choices. Reed, though, was a puzzle. His hesitation, his glances suggested a man at a crossroads. I wrote, "This trial isn't just about justice, it's about who they choose to be." I thought of my own crossroads, from that Birmingham kid to this Memphis judge, each step a fight against the same bias Vance wielded. The courtroom was my battleground now, but it was also a stage for hope, for change, for a city waking up. I closed my notebook, my resolve a flame that wouldn't flicker, ready to face the next day, where truth would demand more than words, it would demand action. The Memphis Federal Courthouse was a storm of anticipation, its marble halls humming with the weight of a city's hopes as I stepped onto the bench for the final days of the trial. I'm Evelyn Harper, a 46-year-old black federal judge from Atlanta, and the eyes of 400 spectators, aged 25 to 55, bore into me, their faces a tapestry of expectation, anger, and fragile hope. 8 days ago, Officers Robert Vance and Caleb Reed had cuffed me at a rest stop off I-40, their prejudice stripping me of dignity. But now I held the gavel, my 5'7" frame cloaked in a black robe that felt like both armor and burden. The courtroom, a 3,000-square-foot arena, pulsed with energy. Reporters 35 strong, scribbled furiously, their cameras clicking like a heartbeat, while outside, the Justice Wall on Beale Street stretched 150 feet, its vibrant murals of broken chains and balanced scales a testament to a city awakening. My heart beat steady, fueled by the chants of 500 protesters, the voices of my mentorship kids in Atlanta, and the unwavering support of my partner, Lisa, and daughter Zoe. As I declared, "Let justice guide us." I knew this trial wasn't just about Vance and Reed, it was about dismantling a system that had let their bias fester, and I was ready to deliver a verdict that would echo far beyond these walls. The prosecution, led by Marcus Tate, my 40-year-old colleague whose 6-foot presence commanded respect, pressed forward with relentless precision. He unveiled new evidence, text messages between Vance and Reed, sent hours after my arrest, boasting about teaching her a lesson. The gallery gasped, their outrage a wave that crashed over the room, mirroring the fury I'd felt in that 5-by-7-foot cell. Marcus called a 30-year-old paramedic, Malik Evans, who'd treated a black teen roughed up by Vance's unit last year. They laughed as he bled, Malik said, his voice trembling with anger. I saw it in their eyes. Vance enjoyed it. The words cut deep, not just for their truth but for the pain they reflected, a pain I'd carried since my Birmingham childhood, where prejudice was as common as summer heat. I glanced at Vance, his 6'2" frame hunched, his broad shoulders no longer iron but crumbling under scrutiny, his eyes once sharp with defiance, now flickered with something closer to fireman, realizing his badge couldn't shield him anymore. Reed, 29, wiry and pale, stared at his hands, his 5'10" frame shrinking as if Malik's words had pierced him. I wondered if he saw his own complicity now, if the weight of those texts was breaking through his silence. The defense, led by Paul Grayson, scrambled to regain ground, his voice smooth but strained. These officers acted under pressure, he argued, part of a flawed system we all inherit. It was a weak deflection, and the gallery's murmurs turned sharp, their frustration palpable. I kept my face neutral, but my notebook, hidden beneath my robe, burned with thoughts. Vance built his castle on hate. Reed laid the bricks. Can they face the ruins? Vance's villainy was clear. He was the storm, a 50-year-old man whose 25-year career thrived on unchecked power. His file, thick with complaints dismissed by a precinct that valued loyalty over justice. But I saw the man behind the myth, his nervous tick when Marcus read the texts, his clenched fists as Malik spoke. He wasn't just a villain, he was a product of a system that rewarded his bias, and now that system was cracking. Red, though, was a puzzle. His hesitation, his averted gaze, suggested a conscience stirring, but his silence that night made him as guilty as Vance. I wrote, Reed's doubt is his chance. Will he take it? Outside, the city was a crucible of change. Keisha Wells, the 34-year-old activist whose podcast now had 500,000 downloads, had launched a new initiative, a mobile app called Justice Lens, designed by a 27-year-old coder, Tiana Brooks, to let citizens record and report police interactions. The app had 10,000 downloads in 48 hours, mostly by 25 to 45-year-olds. Its interface simple but powerful, a tool for accountability that felt like an extension of my gavel. I downloaded it myself, standing at the Justice Wall during a recess. The mural is now a 200-foot testament to Memphis's resolve. A 40-year-old nurse, Sarah Coleman, approached me, her hands clutching a sign, Justice for All. My son was stopped last month, she said, her voice breaking. Your trial gives me hope he won't be next. Her words hit me like a tide, pulling me back to my mentorship kids. Jamal, 15, who'd asked if I was scared. I wasn't scared. I was driven, fueled by Sarah's hope, by Tiana's app, by the 500 protesters chanting outside, their voices a drumbeat for change. Back in the courtroom, Marcus called a final witness, a 45-year-old precinct clerk, Daniel Lee, who'd leaked the text messages. His testimony was a grenade, exposing a culture where Vance's unit targeted black drivers to keep numbers up. I stayed quiet. For years, Daniel said, his voice heavy with regret. But Judge Harper's arrest woke me up. The gallery erupted, and I banged my gavel, my heart racing. Daniel's courage, like Maria's and Malik's, was a thread in a tapestry of truth, weaving together stories that demanded accountability. I thought of my mother, who'd faced tear gas in Birmingham to demand her rights, her legacy of fire in my veins. I wrote, their voices are my strength. This is our reckoning. The prosecution rested, and the defense faltered, Grayson's arguments crumbling under the weight of evidence. Vance whispered to Reed, his voice sharp, but Reed pulled away, his face haunted. I saw it, then a fracture, Reed's doubt growing, Vance's control slipping. As the trial neared its climax, I felt the city's pulse quicken. Protests spread to Nashville and Little Rock, with 1,000 marchers in each city, their signs echoing Memphis's end. Profiling Now. Keisha's podcast featured a new episode, Voices of the Wall, with Sarah and Tiana sharing their stories, hitting 1 million downloads. I listened in my hotel room, 3 miles from the courthouse. Their words a reminder of the stakes. Lisa called, her voice steady. You're changing things, Evelyn, she said. Zoe's proud she's making a mural for you. Zoe's latest drawing arrived via text. A woman in a robe, light radiating from her gavel. You're my hero, Mom, she wrote. I clutched my phone, tears pricking my eyes, and wrote in my notebook, for Zoe, for Sarah, for Memphis, this is why I fight. The verdict came on the 7th day. I looked at Vance and read, their faces a study in contrast. Vance's jaw tight, his eyes defiant but hollow. Reed's head bowed, his hands trembling. Officers Vance and Reed, I began, my voice clear. You are guilty of misconduct and abuse of power. The gallery held its breath as I sentenced Vance to 8 months in jail. Read 2-4, bows stripped of their badges. Truth anchors justice, I said, my words a vow to the 400 faces watching, to the city beyond. This court demands accountability, not just for you, but for the system you serve. The gavel fell, a sound like thunder, and the room erupted. Cheers, sobs, applause that shook the walls. Outside, 600 protesters roared, their voices carrying to Bill Street, where the Justice Wall glowed under floodlights now 250 feet long, a monument to a city reborn. Vance was led away, his broad frame diminished, his eyes avoiding mine. Reed lingered, his gaze meeting mine for a moment, a flicker of remorse I hadn't expected. I wondered if he'd find redemption, if this trial would be his crossroads. I stepped outside, the Memphis air warm, the crowd's energy a tide lifting. Keisha hugged me, her eyes shining. This is just the start, she said. I nodded, feeling the weight of her words, the weight of Memphis, the weight of a nation watching. The app, the wall, the protests, they were sparks, and I was the flame. I wrote, this isn't the end, it's the beginning. As I drove back to my hotel, the city's lights blurred, a reflection of hope, of change, of a future we'd build together. The Atlanta skyline shimmered beyond my office window, its lights a constellation of hope against the night. As I stood reflecting on the journey that had begun with a single, searing moment at a rest stop off I-40 in Memphis. I'm Evelyn Harper, a 46-year-old black federal judge, and the trial that had unfolded from my wrongful arrest cuffed by officers Robert Vance and Caleb Reed for no reason but my skin had become a movement that stretched far beyond Tennessee. The guilty verdict, sentencing Vance to 8 months and Reed to 4, both stripped of their badges, was a spark that lit a fire across the nation. The Justice Wall on Beale Street, now 350 feet long, glowed with murals painted by 25 to 55-year-olds, their colors reds, blues, yellows, telling stories of broken chains and balanced scales. My notebook, my sanctuary since law school, lay open on my desk, its pages filled with the raw truths of that night, the trial, and the legacy we were building. I wrote, "This wasn't just my fight, it was ours, a shared vow to reshape justice." The weight of it all, protests swelling to 10,025 cities. The Justice Lens app with 75,000 users. My book, Truth's Gavel, selling 80,000 copies, settled on my shoulders, not as a burden but as a mantle I wore for my partner Lisa, my daughter, Zoe, and every soul who dared to hope. The aftermath was a tapestry of change woven by countless hands. Keisha Wells, the 34-year-old activist whose podcast Memphis Rising now had 3 million downloads, stood beside me at a rally in Atlanta, 400 miles from Memphis, where 5,000 gathered. Her voice, fierce and unbroken, declared, "Evelyn showed us truth is power." I spoke after her, my 5'7" frame trembling with the weight of their cheers. "Justice isn't a moment," I said, "it's a movement we build daily." The crowd, a mix of young professionals, parents, and retirees, roared, their signs echoing Memphis, "Truth anchors justice." I thought of my mentorship kids, like 15-year-old Jamal, who'd joined Zoe in Atlanta's youth activism group, their voices rising at rallies. Zoe, now 17, sent me a new mural sketch, a black woman's silhouette, gavel raised, stars circling her. "For you, Mom," she texted, and I clutched my phone, tears falling. I wrote, "Zoe's stars are my guide, lighting the path forward." Caleb Reed, the 29-year-old officer whose wiry 5'10" frame had once stood complicit, was carving a new path. I met him at Keisha's Center, 6 miles from the Memphis precinct, where he spoke to 300 people, his voice raw. "I was wrong to stay silent," he said, his hazel eyes meeting mine, no longer shadowed by Vance's influence. He'd joined a reform task force, working with 27-year-old coder Tiana Brooks to enhance Justice Lens, adding a feature for anonymous reporting that boosted its downloads to 100,000. His redemption wasn't complete, but it was real, a testament to the possibility of change. Robert Vance, though, remained a ghost, his 6'2" frame, once Iron Rob, now confined to a small apartment 10 miles outside Memphis. His 25-year career a ruin of 40 buried complaints. I didn't hate him. I mourned the system that had enabled him, a system we were dismantling. I wrote, "Vance chose darkness, Red sought light. We choose the future." The Through Evelyn's Eyes virtual reality exhibit had spread to 15 cities, its 360-degree view of my arrest drawing 50,000 visitors. Their tears and pledges a chorus of awakening. In Chicago, 700 miles from Memphis, a 40-year-old social worker, Lena Carter, told me after experiencing it, "I felt your pain, Evelyn. Now I'm training my team to fight bias." Her words echoed the 100,000 readers of Truth's Gavel, who emailed me stories of starting community dialogues, mentoring kids, or joining reform boards. In Denver, a 50-year-old pastor, Reverend Ellis, launched a police community bridge program, inspired by my trial. In Seattle, Priya, the 30-year-old tech worker behind the VR exhibit, partnered with Tiana to create a national Justice Lens hub, linking 200,000 users. I wrote, "Their actions are my legacy, our legacy, a chain unbroken." Memphis itself was reborn. The city council's reforms, 15 hours of bias training for 2,500 officers, a civilian oversight board with 20 members, monthly forums drawing 800 were now a model for 10 cities. I attended a forum 5 miles from the courthouse where Sarah Coleman, a 40-year-old nurse whose son had been profiled, shared her new role on the board. "You gave us a voice, Evelyn," she said, hugging me. I thought of my mother who'd faced Birmingham's hoses and dogs, her courage a flame I carried. I wrote, "Sarah's voice, my mother's fire, they fuel me." The Justice Wall, now a national landmark, inspired similar walls in Atlanta, Charlotte, and Miami, each painted by communities demanding fairness. I visited Atlanta's, 400 miles from Memphis, touching its mural of a gavel splitting chains, my heart swelling with pride. My speaking tour reached 20,000 in 10 cities. From Miami to San Francisco, each stop a chance to share lessons forged in pain and triumph. I learned that justice isn't a verdict but a commitment, sustained by courage and community. I learned that silence, whether Maria's at the rest stop, Reed's in the cruiser, or a city's for decades, is a chain we must break. I learned that every voice, from Tiana's code to Zoe's art, builds the future. Standing in my Atlanta Office Lisa beside me, her hand warm in mine. I reflected on my journey from a Birmingham girl dodging slurs to a judge reshaping a nation. I wrote, the cuffs couldn't hold me, because truth never bends. My story wasn't just mine, it was Keisha's, Sarah's, Reed's, Zoe's, a collective vow to rewrite justice. Now, I turn to you, the reader. If you faced a situation like mine, racial profiling, systemic racism, abuse of power, how would you approach it to achieve the best outcome? Would you speak out, like Maria, risking regret for truth? Would you build like Tiana, using tools to empower others? Would you stand, like me, turning pain into purpose? The fight against injustice needs your voice, your action, your courage. Join a forum, download Justice Lens, paint a wall, mentor a child, vote for change. The future is ours to write. Will you take up the pen?